let's just go through and do the French door and see how it goes. So,
Okay.
hi everybody. I'm Carmine Dionisio with Service Leaders Network, and today we have John Oliver with Beko, and he's going to go over the French door refrigerator, and then we'll just go ahead and review that. He'll probably throw in some install uh, items in there. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat while he's going through the session. So, John, take it away and go from there.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending. As he mentioned, my name is John Oliver. I am the National Technical Training Manager for Beko in the U.S. The training I did yesterday on dishwashers, I ran out of time, and I'm forecasting that I'm probably going to run out of time today. So as he mentioned, if you could type your questions in, and if I see that I'm running out of time, I will pause and try to answer all the questions that I can. We have a lot of content to cover here, so I'm going to try to be as quick and thorough as possible. So we're covering the Beko French door, and the reason I chose this product is because it is by far our most popular refrigerator. So if you're servicing with us, you will see this product. There are a few distinctives about this product that are different than some other brands out there. And number one is our Defrost dual technology. And what that means is we have two evaporators, one compressor, two evaporators, and the fresh food and freezer compartments do not share air at all. So they're completely sealed off from one another. So there's no damper and fan blowing air into the other compartment. They're completely separate. And the benefits of that are we're able to maintain the temperatures much more accurately per compartment. Plus, we don't have odor transfer. And there's just a lot of really nice benefits, but it's different. And so you got to be aware of that. We also have a technology called EverFresh. And what this is it allows the air to move over your vegetable bins so that the moisture doesn't build up in there and cause the fruit to go bad, fruits and vegetables to go bad too quickly. So, it's sealing it, but it's allowing that air to blow out to get those gases away from the vegetables. But our biggest technology in food preservation is our Active Fresh blue light technology. And what that does is it continues the process of photosynthesis in your fruits and vegetables and causes them to last about 30% longer than a traditional refrigerator. So it's a really nice technology. On some of our other refrigerators that we're coming out with now, we actually have one called Harvest Fresh, which is even more beneficial for food preservation. So, but that's not on this product. We also use an ionizer in this product, just like the dishwasher we were talking about yesterday. And what that does is it infuses the compartment with negative ions to bring down the odors in the compartment. So it really helps, we don't have the odor transfer between the different compartments, and then this ion guard really knocks down the odors. There's also a charcoal filter located on the back that you'll see in a little bit. And one of our things that we're really proud of is our turbo ice maker. We make 11 pounds of ice a day in this product. Very good ice production. So that's some of the distinctives about this refrigerator. The serial tag is going to be found on the inside of the fresh food compartment, and it's actually etched into the plastic lining. It's not a sticker. So if you do have to scrap one of these, we're going to ask you to cut that and take a picture of it. But on this tag, you'll find the model number. But one of our oddities is on the US machines, that model number is found next to what says the marketing code. So that can be a little confusing. So I always like to point that out. In the US, the marketing code is what we would call the model number. You'll notice right below that, we actually do have a heading called model number, but that is not the model number, okay, in the US. We also have the product number or product code, and both of those numbers can be used when looking up technical information in our service website, ManuSoft. So either one of those numbers are perfectly usable. In fact, I always like to cross-reference them to make sure I've got the right unit. You'll also see the serial number located on this tag, and embedded in the serial number is the year and month of manufacture. So that's a really nice thing. It's very easy. You don't have to carry a chart to know how old the product is. You can just look at the first 2 digits and the last 2 digits of the serial number, and that will give you the year and month of manufacture. So as you can see with this one here, we've got a February 22 manufacture date. And the reason that's important is because we do have 2-year parts and labor and 5 years on our compressor. So knowing how old the product is important, especially if the customer doesn't have a receipt. I always tell technicians they can add 3 months to the manufacture date, make that the purchase date if the customer doesn't have a receipt. And if it still falls within that warranty, then we'll gladly cover that under warranty. If not, they're going to have to produce a receipt. You'll also find the type of refrigerant, which is R600, is what we're using on all of our refrigerators today, as well as the charge that we're using in the product. And then you'll also find the high and low side pressures if you're doing any sealed system work. So that's kind of nice too. Now, as mentioned, I will cover just a brief thing about installation, but if you forget everything I share today, don't forget this. This is probably the most important thing I'm actually sharing. And that is our refrigerator does not pull air from the front. Okay. It's a European made refrigerator. And in Europe, most of their refrigerators are not encased in a cabinet, pushed back into an alcove. I'd say in America, it's probably 90%. So because of that, we have developed these standoffs and this air deflector that will be found inside the crisper drawer when the product is unpacked. They have to be installed. If they are not installed, the product will not be able to breathe properly. Your compressor is going to get too hot. It's going to be inefficient. And eventually, if it doesn't get enough air, it will ruin that compressor. Okay. So if you go out to service one of these, look for that and ask the customer where it is if they don't have it. And it's just a really important component that needs to be installed. Okay. All you're doing is putting these 2 spacers on the bottom and then the deflector in between the exhaust and the intake grills. All right, give you just an overview of the product. On this product, the control board is going to be located on the top of the unit. So you have to pull it out from the cabinetry, but it's right up on top. And that'll actually be a benefit when I talk about the service mode at the end, because you can actually test your components right on the top, and then you've got your display where you can turn components on and off. So it's very convenient for a technician. And the display is right there, and that's what, again, the customer will use to interface the unit, change temperature, turn ice makers on, things like that. And that's what you as a technician would interface as well for service mode. We do use reed switches to let the unit know whether the doors are opened or closed. There's 2 at the top in that display assembly and 1 at the bottom of the left door for the freezer drawer. There are 8 sensors on this product. So a lot of sensors. We've got the ambient sensor underneath the display cover, the hinge cover on the right. Then we've got 2 evaporator sensors in the fresh food compartment. We've got 2 air sensors, 1 in the fresh food and 1 in the freezer. And then, all right, I can't remember if I said that. 2 evaporator sensors in the fresh food and then evaporator sensor in the freezer, and 2 air sensors, 1 in the fresh food and 1 in the freezer. And then there's 2 more sensors on the ice maker trays themselves. We have 2 ice trays. Fans, we have the fresh food fan, the condenser fan in the back, and the freezer fan. And then our ice makers actually have a fan at the end of each tray as well. That's one of the reasons why we make ice so quickly. We have 7 heaters on this product, which always makes me laugh that a refrigerator would have so many heaters, but there you have it. So we've got the flapper heater. We've got a fresh food heater in the back wall, embedded in the back wall. We've got the defrost and drain heater in the freezer. 2 fill tube heaters that keep the water line to the ice tray from freezing. And then an ice maker heater embedded in the ceiling of the freezer. Just kind of a redundant heater there. So a lot of heaters on the unit. For water components, of course, the water valve will be in the back of the unit. That's what the bottom arrow is pointing to there. we have a partition in the fresh food section, and inside that partition, we have the reservoir that holds the dispenser water, and we also have another valve up there. All of our dispensing is done on the inside left wall on all of our machines, all of our refrigerators, with the exception of our side-by-side. And then our water filter is an internal water filter on the left side of the ceiling, as you can see there. I like to go over the display with technicians because I found that sometimes there is no problem with the unit. The customers just push the wrong button, and a technician will get out there and not know how the display works or what the different icons mean. So I really like to go over that. And the first one I want to point out here is that when our unit is plugged in but turned off, you'll have a red dot on the front indicating that it's plugged into power. But the unit is not on. And we've actually had service calls where customers say, hey, my lights don't work, it's not getting cold, what's the problem? And just over the phone, you could say, is there a red dot on the display? If so, the refrigerator is not even turned on. And then the problem is compounded because you tell them to press the power button, and there's that little 3 underneath the power button, and that means they have to hold it for 3 seconds. And what happens is they press the button quickly, and it doesn't come on. They say, well, I got a bad refrigerator. No, you have to hold it for 3 seconds. And when you do that, it'll come on. Then the next button to the right of that is called your quick cool button. And this will drop the temperature down to its lowest temperature, which is, that's in the fresh food department, compartment, that drops it down to 33 degrees, which is the lowest fresh food compartment. And it'll hold that for 2 hours and then go back to whatever they have it set at previously. It's really nice if you've got a bunch of fruits and vegetables or product that you're putting into the refrigerator, you can drop it down and get it nice and cold in there. The next button is your fresh food temp set button. And you can see the range of temperatures available there, anywhere from 33 degrees, the lowest, all the way up to 46 degrees. 39 is highlighted because that's the factory default on this product. The next display to the right would be your freezer temperature. So you've got 2 different temperature displays, and you'd use that key to the right of that display to change the temperature. And there we can go anywhere from 5 degrees, which is the default temperature, all the way down to -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you press the next button, Quick Freeze, that does the same thing that Quick Cool did for the fresh food compartment, except in the freezer, it drops it down even lower than the lowest setting. So it'll go down to -16 degrees. And that's really nice for if you're putting a bunch of fresh meat in the freezer, you want to drop it down really cold. Also, it'll increase the ice production even more when it's down at that cold, because obviously it'll freeze faster. So that's what that does. And you'll have the little snowflake icon when either Quick Cool or Quick Freeze is turned on. Then lastly, you have the alarm off key. And that is, if the door is left open for more than a minute, an audible alarm will sound. And if you press that, it'll turn the alarm system off until you close the door again, and that will turn the alarm system back on. Now, those are the buttons as you see them, but you'll notice that there's some little icons underneath 4 of the buttons, and those are secondary functions. And believe it or not, these can cause service issues too if the customer doesn't realize what they're for. The first one is this vacation mode. It's got a little beach umbrella with a 3, meaning if you hold that Quick Cool button for 3 seconds, it'll put it into vacation mode. This is a very European thing. In Europe, they will often go on vacation for a month, and they'll put their refrigerator into a vacation mode, which makes the fresh food 50 degrees while the freezer stays at its set temperature. Obviously, in America, that could be a bad problem if they accidentally turn that on because their fresh food compartment's going to warm up and their food's going to go bad. So again, if you have a customer complaining about temperature, the first thing you want to ask them is what temperature is being displayed. Because when it's in vacation mode, you'll just have dashes in the fresh food temp screen. And you'll also have a beach umbrella. So those are 2 things that will indicate that. If that's the case, press and hold that for 3 seconds. You get out of vacation mode. It'll stay in vacation mode until you turn it off. Okay. The next one is probably one of our biggest nuisance service issues. And I've got some really good news to tell you about right after this. And that is from the factory, the ice maker is not turned on. But in the icon, you see 2 little ice cubes. And so the customer thinks the ice maker is on and then complains that it's not making ice. If you look at that icon, it has a slash through those ice cubes, meaning no ice. But that seems backwards to most Americans, and so they think the ice maker is not turned on. You have to press the freezer set key for 3 seconds. That icon will go away, and when that icon's gone, the ice maker's on. You can see how this is confusing. Well, the good news I have to share with you is that I think by the end of this month, all refrigerators will have a new display and board, and there'll be 3 ice cubes. And when the ice cubes are illuminated, that means the ice maker is on. And when there's no illumination of the 3 cubes, the ice maker's off. Makes sense, right? So that display and board will be backwards compatible. So if the customer doesn't like that, they will have the option of changing that in the future. Eco Extra is another very European thing. Beko is very interested in the environment. We're very big on that. We've won numerous awards. And so we put a lot of these kind of features on our products. What the Eco Extra does is it causes the refrigerator to go down to a highly efficient mode when the doors are closed, if this feature is turned on. So for instance, overnight, or you're going away for a weekend, when the doors are closed for an extended period of time, it's going to ramp that compressor down. It's not going to defrost as often or at all, depending on the length of time. And so it really conserves energy. You may get a question about that. What's that all about? It's a energy saving feature. And then lastly, the alarm off key also functions as a filter replacement reset. So you'll get a little icon on the screen that lets the customer know they need to change their filter. It's just a timer. There's no flow meter, so it'll just come on after 130 days, and they press that to reset it. Okay. I've talked about all the icons there, but there's one I haven't talked about, and that's that little triangle with the exclamation point. That's a high temp warning icon. And the reason I don't talk about it in the original part is because you'll rarely ever see it. And so it usually never comes up. But if you do see it, there's a few things you need to understand about it. And the first is that it only applies to the freezer. It has nothing to do with the fresh food, completely separate compartments. What it's telling you is that after the initial 72 hours, the temperature in the freezer has gotten above 28 degrees. We give it 72 hours after it's initially plugged in because we realize it's got to get down to temperature. But after that, we don't want to see those kind of temperatures. So if we see it getting up to 28 and not getting below 16 within 12 hours, it's going to throw a fault. It's going to throw this high temp fault. The customer can press the alarm off key. That'll stop the beeping. But that little icon is going to stay there until the temperature drops below 16 degrees. If it hasn't in 3.5 hours, it's going to start beeping again. They can continue doing this until it goes away. Now, the most common cause of this is a power failure. The customer lost power in their house. It was off for several hours and then took several more hours, for them to notice it. So that's what the first question you want to ask the customer if they see this. Did you lose power? Well, your freezer got too warm in that period, and that's why you have that fault. The second cause is improper closure. It's just the drawer is not closing properly, and it got too warm in there. I actually had this on my unit in my training facility where someone didn't put one of the bottom shelves in properly, and the door didn't close all the way, and I got the high temp. Or it could be the gasket not sealing properly. Either way, key thing takeaway is it's a freezer warning. It's got too warm in the freezer. To get rid of it, you get into the service mode and advance to the display test, and that'll go away. It'll go away on its own if it drops below that temperature, but if you want to manually clear it, that's how you would do it. Okay, that's the display. What we're going to do now is go through each one of the components. And as I go through these components, I'm going to show you how to access those components with short videos, since we don't have the opportunity to do hands-on like we would normally do in a training. So first component is that control board up on top. To get that, to access it, you're going to remove a single Phillips screw and push that that cover off to the left, and then it'll open up. Inside that cover, you'll find all the fault codes, which is a really nice feature. So it's right on the product. You just flip that over and there they are. So this is what it looks like in real time. Phillips removal, slide it to the left and pull it off. And there's all your fault codes. Your display assembly is also where your fresh food door reed switches are going to be located. And to access this, there's going to be 7 screws along the top, all Phillips, but not all the same size. So as you're removing them, keep them in an order that makes sense to you. Once you remove those, you'll flip it back and you'll have 3 plugs, one for the display and one for each of the reed switches. So you'll just pull down on those reed switches to unplug that. And that's a complete assembly right there. The assembly won't come with the reed switches. So if you're not replacing the reed switches, make sure you take them from the old one and transfer them. So again, you've got your top reed switches, and then there's the bottom reed switch on the bottom of the left door for the freezer. To access those work, of course, with magnets inside the top of the door on the fresh food doors, and there's one on the top of the drawer in the freezer section. To access those, we've already lifted up the display. You're just going to unplug them and then unclip them from their housing. And then the one on the bottom of the fresh food left door, there's a little door. You'll pry that open. 2 screws secure it to that door. You'll remove those and then unplug it. And there's your reed switch. Something I want to say about the reed switch that I've seen in the field is, remember I told you that if the alarm goes off and the customer pushes the alarm off, that it will stay off until the door closes again, and that turns the alarm system back on. Well, if you have a bad reed switch, it will never know that the door is closed, right? Because they're in series. So if one of them is out, it won't know that the door's closed. So the way this often manifests itself is a customer will complain that all their vegetables are freezing. Why? Because the fan never comes on. And so all of that cold air is just dropping down to the bottom of the fresh food compartment and literally turning the vegetables into rocks because it'll get so cold down there without that air movement. Okay. So just be aware of that. If you see that, one of the first things you want to check is, are my reed switches working? And of course, you can do that by throwing a magnet over those reed switches and seeing if the lights and fans go out and come on respectively. On this product, our door handles come pre-installed, but if you have to replace one, for instance, if you have a dented door panel and you have to replace the door, you have to remove those panels, you're going to use a rubber mallet to knock that off. There's no set screws used currently. That's coming in a couple months, but you would just knock it off to get the handle off. And if you have to remove the door, there's 4 T25 Torx screws at the top hinge. And then if you want to remove the bottom hinge, those are T25 Torx as well. So this is what it would look like. You just open the door, give it a gentle wrap on the bottom, and that would come off. For the freezer door, you'd knock it off to the left to get it off. And then get it into position and then tap it into place gently. And then again, to remove the door, you're going to remove the ground wire for the flapper heater, and then the 4 screws for the hinge, and then you can lift that hinge off and lift the entire door assembly off. Okay, so that's how you would remove that. Moving on to the interior components. Again, the water filter is inside. Then we have our partition, and you've noticed between those two pictures, I removed all the shelves. Now you can see that partition, and again, that's where the water reservoir is and an additional dispenser water valve. That comes as a complete assembly, so you don't have to open it up and get to that valve. It comes as one assembly. If you want to remove the back, there's going to be 4 screws on the back. 2 of them are Torx and 2 of them are Phillips. And once you remove that back, notice that you don't see any evaporator back there. It's not accessible. The evaporator in the fresh food compartment is not accessible. Because it's not accessible, some people say, well, that seems like that's going to be an exchange in the making. That's not what we found. We've been using this design for decades. And because it's foamed in at the factory and tested, it's not exposed to moisture in the air like a traditional refrigerator, so you don't have the acid building up on the coils. It's not exposed to as much movement because it's foamed in. So it tends to last a lot longer is what we've found. We don't really have issues with it. There you can see the ionizer on the back wall that is accessible. And on the other side of that back panel is where you'll find the fresh food fan. And there's that charcoal filter that I mentioned. Flapper heater is located on the left door. And there's a close-up of that internal evaporator. You can also see the fresh food heater there, as well as the 2 evaporator sensors. None of those are accessible. That's obviously with the back cut open. Now, that requires a removal of all those shelves if you wanted to get that far. But what I want to show you here is if you just want to get to the fan and the ionizer, removing those 4 screws, the 2 Torx screws and the Phillips screws that you'll find underneath these covers here, by removing those, you'll be able to bend that cover forward without removing all of those bottom shelves in the partition. So what you're seeing here is I'm removing all those components. Now I'm unclipping it with my plastic pry tool, and I'm going to bend it down at the top so I can get it out of its channel and come forward. Now this is the hardest part, is you're working blind here, but you can reach in there and just pull down on the fan plug, and this is the plug for that blue light there. You just unplug it. Now look at how I can bend this forward. Now you might be thinking, well, is that going to break? This refrigerator that I shot this on, I just shot this yesterday, was working. It was 39 degrees in there, nice and cold. It's not going to break. But once I come forward here, you can see I had access to the ionizer, and then here I have access to the fresh food fan, and I don't have to remove all of those bottom shelves. So it just saves you time. Okay. The gasket on our units presses into a channel, so there's no brackets or screws. Just peel it out, stick the new one in. Our lights, there's 6 LED lights in the fresh food compartment, 2 at the top, 2 on the 2 long ones on the side, and 2 at the bottom. And to remove them, it's very simple. You're just going to pry the covers off and pull back a little clip there that holds it in, and just pull straight down on the board. These are in parallel, so if one board goes bad, it's not going to take all the other ones out. And the side ones you're going to pry out, unclip it from the bottom, and there's your lens and board. And then the bottom ones, you'd have to take all those bottom shelves out to access, of course, and just pry up on those little clips. This one's kind of hard to get to. But again, they're LED boards. They don't go very often, but there's that. And then there's one more in the freezer, which is like the ceiling ones in the fresh food compartment. They're all DC, and as I mentioned, they are in parallel. A water dispenser, as I mentioned, is on the left wall, and to access it is very simple. You're just going to remove that bottom shelf there and that Everfresh lid. I've already taken the drawer out, and you'll see a little cover in the back corner there with 3 Phillips screws. If you remove those 3 screws, you can open that cover and you'll find a water line with a John Guest fitting back there. You can reach in there and depress that little collar on that John Guest fitting, disconnect that hose. You can see I'm doing it with one hand. kind of tricky, but you can do it. And then you're going to take a plastic pry tool, go along the back side and the bottom of the dispenser button there in the front side. Don't do the top because there's two little ears that stick up there. And you're just going to unplug the light for the display and then just pull it out. Very, very easy to replace, and then you just slide it back in. If you have to get to that micro switch, just pry it out of its holder and unplug it. Very easy to access. So our water filter, I've mentioned a couple of times now, is inside the fresh food compartment. To remove it, you're just going to open that cover, pull it all the way down and straight out. It doesn't twist in. To replace it, again, straight in, push it all the way up, and then slide the cover back. Now, we have had some issues with the filter heads leaking, and we've struggled to figure out what the issue is. I think we've gotten it now, and we're coming up with a solution. Doesn't happen on every unit, but if you have it, you'll need to replace that filter head. To do that, you're just going to take the cover off. You just pop it off, take that back cover off, and then there's a single Phillips screw that holds it to the ceiling. You're going to remove that screw. It'll drop down, and you'll see two hoses with John Guest connections. You press the collars in and take it off. There's your filter head. Now, when you go to put it back in, I highly recommend marking that white line with a 1/2-inch mark from the end. The reason is we've had some situations where a technician, when he replaces this, he doesn't get that hose all the way in, and it's white, so it's really hard to see it moving. If you put a little marker on it, you can easily see when I push this in that it goes in far enough. Now you know it's in. Those are two different sizes on those water lines. We only seem to see it on that 5/16 line. Put it in, and then before you screw it all back in, put the filter or the stopper in there and just make sure it's not leaking. Then you can take that back out, that bypass plug, and then screw it back into the ceiling. Okay. Put the covers back on, and then your filter cover back on. So very easy to replace. And again, we're getting to the bottom of that leak. As noted there, we do have a bypass plug, and it is included with the product. The customer either has to have the filter or the bypass plug in for the dispenser and ice maker to work. So just make sure one of those is in. There's our flapper heater on the left door. I've got the wiring schematic here just to show you that there's actually 4 heaters that are in parallel with one another here. So just wanted to let you know that. That'll make more sense in a minute. But to replace it, there's just 2 screws at the top and 2 screws at the bottom. And it's hooked onto the side, so you just pull it up and then you could unplug it. That's one complete assembly. Okay. Now, sensors, I've already mentioned we have 8 sensors. Both of the air sensors in the fresh food and the freezer are plug-in sensors. So if they go bad, you're just unplugging them, plugging them back in. I've already mentioned the evaporator sensors in the fresh food are foamed in, so they're not accessible. The ice maker sensors come with the ice maker assembly, so you don't have to replace those. You just replace the whole ice maker. The ambient sensor and the freezer evaporator sensor, you're going to have to hardwire. So if those sensors go bad, you're going to cut and splice, but there's plenty of wire to do that. Now, one thing to note as far as our fault codes is that out of the 10 fault codes that you can have on this unit, 6 of them are sensor faults, as you can see here. So we've got fault codes for all of these sensors, except for the fresh food evaporator sensors. Oh, no, we do. They added the E2. That's right. I forgot they added that. So all of those sensors are have their own fault code. And if a sensor is bad, it's going to go into a default algorithm until you replace it. But it will be flashing on the display that there's a problem. By the way, we don't store faults. So if you're seeing a fault, it is a problem currently. And once you, like if you unplug one of these sensors, you'll get a like a E3 for your fresh food sensor. As soon as you plug it back in, that fault goes away. So if you're seeing a fault, you've got a problem. So your freezer drawer, we're going to go on down to the freezer now. To remove that drawer, very simple. If you just pull it out and then slide the tray in towards the freezer, you'll notice a Phillips screw on each side of the rail, just one. If you remove that screw on both sides, you can leave the shelf in place and just lift the whole assembly out together. It's very easy. You don't have to. Now, obviously, that might have food in the customer's house, so you might want to get that out, but it's very easy to move it. That sits on the drawer rails, and those rails are very easy to replace, but you're going to want to use a cordless drill because there's 18 screws. So T25 Torx bit, 18 of them. So to replace it, you're going to remove those 9 on each side, and you'll have to pull out for the bottom 3. So 6 along the top, 3 more on the bottom on each side. And once you remove all those, you're just going to pull it off from the wall. And then the same thing on the other side. And again, that comes as a complete assembly. Very easy to replace. Okay, looking inside the freezer, we've got our ice maker. We've got our anti-racking rails that we just looked at. We've got our freezer light in the top, the air sensor over on the right-hand side. If you remove that back wall, now you can see our evaporator sensor, our thermal fuse, and our freezer fan. And of course, our defrost element and our fill tube heaters up on the ceiling there, okay? Our ice maker is a twist tray type, so there's no heater in it. It'll just twist to eject the cubes. You'll notice that we have one motor and we use a gearbox to turn both trays. So if you've worked on Beko before, we used to have 2 motors. Now we just have 1 motor, less to go wrong. And we have that gearbox that transfers the movement. Again, there's a temp sensor on the bottom of each tray. And then there's the bail arm that will come down and check for the presence of ice, okay? As noted before, there's a fan at the end of each tray. Again, that's all one assembly. So anything goes wrong with this, you're replacing the entire unit. To replace it, there's going to be a single screw that secures it to the ceiling. You're going to remove that, then pull forward, come down, and unplug your motor harness and then your 2 fan harnesses. So the motor and sensor harness, and then your 2 fan harnesses. And that's how you pull it out. There's 2 fault codes associated with that, the ice maker sensor and the ice maker failure, which is the motor. It's not finding home position, or it's not rotating like it ought to. So either one of those, you're going to require the replacement of it. We don't tell you which sensor is bad. You can find that in the service mode, but either way, you got to replace the whole thing. Okay, we're going to talk about the defrost system here. Before we do that, though, I'll show you how to access it. You're going to drop this partition down in the middle, 4 screws, and then 2 clips in the front. You press in on those clips, drop that partition down. Then you're just going to remove the rails on the left side, not the right side, the left side. 2 T25 Torx for that top one. You can see I removed the back one first and then the front one. And then pull that whole assembly off the wall. And then remove the 9 screws on that left rail. And you don't have to remove the right one. Just pull that one off there and put it off to the right side. That gets it out of your way. Now you'll find there's a single Phillips screw at the bottom of that cover. You just remove that. And now you can pull that whole cover out. There's no wires attached to it, no sensors attached to it. Just pull the whole thing out. And that's going to give you access to the evaporator and defrost element. Okay. Now, let's talk about the defrost system. So you can see that there's a defrost heater, and then foamed into the liner is a drain heater. Those are in parallel with each other. and they both are protected by this thermal fuse. There's two sides to that thermal fuse. If you get an E4 fault, it is not necessarily one of these. If you have to replace it, we've taken that back wall off, and you're going to find that there's 4 clips on it, 2 on the front, 2 on the back. You're going to pull that evaporator forward, unclip those clips, and then you're just going to peel that defrost element off of the evaporator, like you see here. The drain heater, as I mentioned, is foamed into the liner, so you can't access it. But we haven't really seen a lot of issues with either of those. We do have a little wire that you can attach to the defrost heater to go down into the drain hole should the drain heater go. But what I want to talk about is how an E4 is not necessarily a heater fault. Okay, it doesn't say that the heater is open. What it's telling you is that it hasn't reached 50 degrees in the defrost cycle within an hour. When it calls for a defrost, the board starts looking for 50 degrees on that evap sensor. If it doesn't register that in 60 minutes, it's going to try it again 2 more times. So 3 attempts. And if it doesn't reach that temperature, it's going to throw an E4. So what you're going to want to figure out is why. You know, is there a block of ice back there? Is one of my heaters bad? But don't just assume it's a defrost heater. It's very easy to test those heaters. We have an access plate right behind the ice maker, so you can cover that, remove that cover, and then you have both the thermal fuse and the defrost plug. You can unplug that, check for resistance. Is it open? Is it good? And then inside the plug where that plugged in, you can measure the drain heater. Is that resistance good? You can check both sides of the thermal fuse. Is it closed or is it open? But the beauty is you don't have to remove that back wall to make all these tests. You can also test right at the main board up on top. If you do that, just keep in mind that they are parallel. So you're not going to be getting 325 or 78. You're going to be getting somewhere around 62 ohms because they're in parallel. If you don't get that measurement, it'll be one or the other, either the 325 or the 78, and you know which one's bad. So, you know, you can do that right from the board on the top. The fill tube heater, there's 2 of them. To access it, you're going to unplug it in the freezer and then go to the back to get at it. So unplug the one you want to replace. And then on the back of the unit, there's going to be a cover, single Phillips screw, remove that, take the cover off, and then you just pull it out. It's just held in by a silicone gasket. You're just going to pull it out, and you'll find a John Guest fitting at the bottom, press on the collar, and you can pull that whole thing out. Very easy. Now, when you go to put it in, it's very important that you wiggle it while you're moving it in so that it doesn't get all bunched up inside there and cause, you know, a water problem, like the water's not able to get out. Put your John Guest fitting in, pull on the collar, make sure it's locked in good, put your cover back on. What I'm going to show you here in a second is what it looks like if that tube gets bunched up inside there. Obviously, that's going to cause, it can cause spraying water or a clog. So here it is. You can see what the right one looks like. The left one is all bunched up. I'm taking my plastic pry tool and I'm pulling that little nozzle out. And you'll see when it finally pops out, there it is. Just make sure you check that if you're replacing one of those. Then you just plug it back in and you're good to go. As mentioned before, we do have an ice maker heater foamed into the ceiling. Here you can see I've cut away the liner so you can see it. It's not replaceable, nor would you even know if it went bad because the fill tube heaters are going to take care of that. But it is in series, parallel with the flapper heater and the 2 fill tube heaters. We've already looked at replacing the fresh food fan. We've already talked about the ice maker fan being part of the ice maker assembly. The freezer fan and the condenser fan are very easy to access. 2 screws on the back wall of the freezer, pulls it away and then unplug it, drops that fan down. And that's an assembly. So you've got the fan blade and then the housing that the motor sits in. So if you're just replacing the motor, you're going to pull that fan blade off and open up that housing like you see here to access that motor. Okay. And then for your condenser fan, obviously it's going to be located back near the compressor, the condenser coils. There's 3 screws. You will need a right angle Phillips screwdriver to get at these screws. It's kind of a pain. But once you loosen them, you can lift that out of there. And there's your fan assembly. Okay. There's 2 fans for faults. Notice there's not one for the fresh food fan, and that's because the fresh food fan runs at a set speed. It doesn't vary, whereas the freezer and the condenser fan have variable speeds, and that fault is indicating that it's not at the right speed. So there's only a freezer and a condenser fan fault that you'll see, not for the fresh food. Lastly, we're back at the rear component where we have our filter dryer, our inverter, compressor, condenser. There's that condenser fan and our water valve. The inverter, this is a variable capacity compressor, obviously. So it's going to regulate the speed and the runtime of that compressor. To replace that inverter, it comes as a complete assembly with a power cord. So you're going to remove the wire guide there, remove the ground wire, single screw at the bottom of the inverter will detach it from the compressor. You can unplug it and then pull it off to the left. And then you'll have 2 more plugs, the one that actually plugs into the compressor, which you'll pry off there, and then your ground wire in the back. And so that, again, comes as a complete assembly with the power cord. So just unplug that and pull the whole assembly out. Now, we get asked a lot of times, how do you check the inverter? Basically, there's no good way to, to check the speed of the compressor and so on well, I should say most people don't have a meter that can do that. So what I always tell techs to do is pop the cover off of the inverter if your compressor is not working, and you're going to be looking for 120 volts at that top plug. Do you have 120 volts coming into the inverter? Great. Then you're going to pop the inverter off, measure your resistance in between any 2 pins on the compressor. If you're reading around 8.7 between any 2, your compressor is probably good. Your inverter is getting the right voltage. If the compressor is not working, you got a bad inverter. It's not foolproof, but 9 times out of 10, if your compressor is not running, it is the inverter and not the compressor. And then our water valve, we have 1 assembly in the back, and then that other one I mentioned inside the partition in the fresh food compartment. And just remember, when you're testing the dispenser, like in service mode, 2 water valves are actually energizing, the one at the main water valve and the one inside that partition. So you could have a problem with either one. Just remember, it's not 1 valve that's coming on, it's 2 valves that are coming on. To replace that main water valve on the back cover, you remove the back cover, single screw holds it in place. I recommend you take a picture of that so you get all the water lines back where they belong, because you can mix them up. And then you've got 3 plugs there. They're all different sizes, so you can't mix them up. You're going to unplug those, and that's a complete assembly. And again, all of these components can be tested from the board at the top for resistance. We do make a quick reference guide to allow you to do that. Okay, last thing I'm just going to cover real quickly here is the service mode. I'm just going to run through this and talk about it. I have a video for it, but just for the sake of time, I'm not going to show the video. But this will allow you to get into the service mode. You're going to press the outer 2 keys. Then you can do a display test where it checks all the LED icons. Then you can do a software and version and revision test to see what software is in there. Then you can do the control board software check. Then you can check all of the sensors. It'll scroll through and tell you what they're reading in Celsius. And it'll keep scrolling through so you can just check them. Then you can tap the outer 2 buttons again and check your low voltage DC components like your ice maker, twist and your fans and lights. Press the outer two again, and now you can get into a mode where you can go through and turn on each component individually. So you can see the list there. You can turn on your ice maker motors, your water valves, your everything. Individually, you can turn them on and off and test them. So it's really nice. And then you can even turn your compressor on at different speeds. And if you have a meter that can check the hertz, you can read it at the inverter to see if it's at the right speed. And then lastly, you tap the outer two buttons again, and you can actually adjust the fill time on the ice maker. If it's putting too much water in, you can cut that back. From the factory, it's set at 9.9, which is the highest setting. And then to get out of it, you're just going to press and hold the outer two keys again, and that gets you out of the service mode. Again, there is a video here. I'm just going to bypass this video just for the sake of time, in case there's any questions. Again, there's 10 faults. These are the possible faults. And as I mentioned, you got 2 fan faults, 1 defrost system fault, and everything else are sensor faults. Okay. So that's the presentation that I had to give you. Here's some information. You can scan that top one for a link to our Manusoft website. And then those 2 bottom scans will take you to our technical training video website and our customer care website. Those are all free. You can access those and search for all the videos that you saw today, as well as many others. We've got over 200 of them. And then there's our tech line number, which is good from 8 o'clock Eastern time to 5 p.m. Western time or Pacific time. If I can open it up, if there's any questions, I can't see them if there are. How do I see those? Oh, here we go. I don't see any. Look at that. Is there anybody here? Are there any questions? Okay. Well, if there's no questions, thank you very much for your time.